Good evening, I hope everybody is doing well. It was a lovely day, so it was. I'm going to be talking about King Henry VIII. He was born on the 28th of June 1491 and died the 28th of January 1547. King Henry was the King of England from the 22nd of April 1509 until his death in 1547. Henry is known for 6 marriages, and his efforts to have his first marriage to Catherine of Aragon argued his disagreement with Pope Clement VII about such an argument led Henry to initiate the English Reformation, separating the Church of England from papal authority. He anointed himself supreme head of the Church of England and dissolved convents and monasteries, for which he was excommunicated by the Pope. He wasn't a very nice king either. But you'll soon, obviously, his reign, as I say, was the 22nd of April 1509 to the 28th of January 1547. His coronation was the 24th of June 1509. His predecessor was Henry the Seventh, and his successor was Edward the Sixth. Obviously, he was born on the 28th of June 1491, Palace of Placentia, Greenwich, England. I don't even think it's called that anymore. I mean, they've changed. See, from then to now, they've changed a lot of names. Also, he died in, as I said, the 28th of January 1547, age 55, at the Palace of Whitehall, Westminster, England. He was buried on the 16th of February 1547 at St George's Chapel, Windsor Castle, Berkshire. His spouses are Catherine of Aragon, 1509, inaugurated 1553, Anne Boleyn, 1553, Jane Seymour, 1536. She died in 1537. Anne Cleves, 1540, and obviously he divorced her in 1540. Catherine Howard, 1540, and died in 1542. And Catherine Parr, 1543. Also, it talks about Henry, Duke of Cornwall, Mary the First, Elizabeth the First, Edward the Sixth, Henry Fitzroy, Duke of Richmond and Somerset. The house was Tudor. Henry the Eighth of England, the mother Elizabeth York, he was a Catholic. 1491 to 1534, the Church of England, 1534 to 1547. So he was born in Greenwich. Henry brought radical changes to the Constitution of England, expanding royal power and ushering in the theory of the divine rights of kings in opposition of papal supremacy. Crossly, a lot of churches had a lot more power, so they did, of the countries, and obviously he changed that. He changed a lot of things for the UK. He frequently used charges of treason and heresy to quell dissent, and those accused were often executed without formal trial using bills of attainder. He achieved many of his political aims through his chief minister, some of whom were banished or executed when he fell out of his favour. Thomas Worsley, Thomas Cromwell, and Thomas Cranmer all figured prominently in his administration. He was, as I said, he was a horrible, horrible king at the times. Horrible. I mean, he killed some of his wives, and I think there was one. I think it was Catherine Aragon or something like that that he loved the most. I know there's one that he loved more than another, and things like that. And he was so adamant he wanted a boy, and that was. And remember, he married some of these as young little girls. Henry was an extravagant spender, using proceeds from the dissolution of the monasteries and acts of Reformation Parliament. He converted money from what that was formerly paid to Rome into royal revenue. Despite the money from these sources, he was often on the verge of financial ruin due to personal extravagance and costly and large unproductive wars, particularly with King Francis I of France, Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor of the Kingdom, James I of Scotland, and the Scottish Regency under the Earl of Arran and Mary of Guise. He founded the Royal Navy, oversaw the annexation of Wales to England with the Laws in Wales Acts 1535 and 1542, and was the first English monarch to rule as King of Ireland following the Crown of Ireland Act 1542. I'm not sure if that, I mean, obviously the monarch is still kind of over a lot of different countries, but now the monarch is not allowed to get involved with politics. It's all changed from there. And I can't remember, but I think it was after he died. I think it came in. I think it was. I'm not 100% sure, but I can do another video on that. Henry contemporaries considered him an attractive, educated, and accomplished king. He has been described as one of the most charismatic rulers to sit in the English throne, and his reign described as the most important English history. He was an author, a composer. As he aged, he became severely overweight and his health suffered. He is frequently characterized in his later life as lustful, egotistical, paranoid, and tyrannical monarch. He was succeeded by his son Edward VI. Obviously, he had a lot of marriages, and a lot of these people, I mean, his marriages were Henry VIII, both of his obviously, if I learn once I learn how to do show you the other side, I can show you things like this. Just still learning how to do things like this. But it's actually interesting. So it is. Obviously, it talks about early reign. When it talks like Henry VIII died in April 1509. The 17-year-old Henry seeked him as king soon after his father's burial on 10th of May. Henry suddenly declared that he would indeed marry Catherine, leaving unresolved several issues concerning the papal dispensation and a missing part of the married portion. The new king maintained that it had been his father's dying wish that he marry Catherine. Whether or not this was true, it was convenient. Emperor Maximilian had been attempting to marry his granddaughter Eleanor, Catherine's niece, to Henry. She has now been jilted. Henry's wedding to Catherine was held at the Friars' Church in Greenwich on the 11th of June 1509. Henry claimed descendant from Constantine the Great and King Arthur, and saw himself as his direct successor. As I said, he was a very horrible king, and anybody who spent money as if it was nothing, just like the monarch today. And if you look back then to now, not much has changed when it comes to the monarch, except obviously the driving, the big fancy cars and flying big jets and things like that. And they cost a lot of money for the taxpayers, just as they did then, because it's obviously taxpayers that pay for these people. Um, but he was a horrible, horrible, horrible person, and anybody that disagreed with him would get thrown in jail. And I said it changed the church. If he was Catholic, and then because he wanted to marry he decided to become. Everything had to be done his way or no way. He was very egoistic, so he was very. It was, imagine being around him, working for him. It would have been scary to, in case you said something wrong, the wrong word or anything, just like it is now. But we've got freedom of speech. But back then, even if you work for people like that, it's like they're too scared to speak about these people, because you sit in waivers and things like that, so you can't speak about them at all. Um, but he was a horrible, horrible person, a horrible person. Wasn't liked, and the amount of marriages he had just because he won, and when he didn't have children, and I had a daughter, and there's so much. As I say, obviously after Henry married Catherine in the Cathedral, she gave birth to a stillborn girl on the 31st of January 1510. About 4 months later, Catherine became pregnant again. On the 1st of January 1511, New Year's Day, a son, Henry, was born. After the grief of losing their first child, the couple were pleased to have a boy, and festivities were held, because obviously in the times it was seen to have a boy to be the next king, because obviously it was obviously a manly thing, it's like, I have to have a boy, you have to have a boy. And if they didn't have a boy, it wasn't very happy. So they could take over the reign. But things have changed. Well, sort of. Sorry, I've just smacked that right against my lips. Probably only sound nice. But including a two-deer just known as the Westminster Tournament. However, the child died 7 weeks later. Catherine had two stillborn sons, 1513 and 1515, but gave birth in February the 15th of 16 to a girl, Mary. Relations between Henry and Catherine had been strained, but they eased slightly after Mary's birth. Although Henry's marriage to Catherine was since been described as unusually good, it is known that Henry took mistresses. It was revealed in 1510 that Henry had been conducting an affair with one of the sisters of Edward Stafford, third Duke of Buckingham. Either Elizabeth or Anne Hastings, Countess of Huntingdon. The most significant mistress for about 3 years, started in 1516, was Elizabeth Blount. Blount is one of only two completely undisputed mistresses considered by some of you for a virile young king. Exactly how many he had has been disputed. Obviously, there's been back and forth anyway. there's the amount of, but he said, the amount of people he slept with, and it's all this so he can have a boy. Blount gave birth to in June in 1598. Henry's uh, illegitimate son Henry Fitzroy. The young boy was made Duke of Richmond in June 1525, and what some thought was one step on the path to his eventual legamentation. Fitzroy married Mary Howard in 1533, but died childless 3 years later. At the time of his death in 1536, Parliament was considering the Second Succession Act, which could have allowed him to become king. I mean, as I said, in the days, they had to be seen as having a boy to succeed the crown, and not a girl. A lot of things sort of changed, but obviously he changed things that, like, you couldn't marry a Protestant, couldn't marry a Catholic, or a Catholic couldn't marry a Protestant, and because it was not allowed and things like that. But no, obviously nowadays you can marry who you want, as long as you don't marry children, which is against the law, very against the law. Back then, it's like these kings and queens thought they could, because you think they married into families and kept it in the line of their successor. Well, also Henry slept with whoever he wanted because he was determined. He wanted a son, and that was it. It was during his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, Henry conducted an affair with Mary Boleyn, Catherine's lady in waiting. The speculation that Mary's two children, Henry Carey and Catherine Carey, were fathered by Henry, but it's never been proven. King Henry never acknowledged them, as he did in the case of Henry Fitzroy. Also in 1525, Henry grew more impatient with Catherine's inability to produce a male heir. As I said, it was very important for them to have male heirs. Became enamoured of Mary Boleyn's sister, Anne Boleyn, a charismatic young woman of 25 in the Queen's entourage. Anne, however, resisted his attempts to seduce her and refused to become his mistress, as her sister had. It was in this context that Henry considered his three options for finding a dynastic successor, and hence resolving came to be described at court as the king's great matter. He was absolutely, he was a winnie. He was an absolute winnie. But then, a lot of if you think back in history at all different places about the world, they were all mental about this time. Okay, they're still are, but the way they acted was ridiculous. Obviously, it was, as I said, he was determined to have a heir of who he was. It would, obviously, these options were legalising Henry Fitzroy, which would need the involvement of the Pope and would be open to challenge, marrying off Mary, his daughter, with Catherine as soon as possible, and hoping for a grandson to inherit directly. But Mary was considered unlikely to conceive before Henry's death, or somehow rejecting Catherine and marrying someone else of childbearing age, probably seeing the possibility of marrying Anne the third, ultimately the most attractive possibility to the 34-year-old Henry, and it soon became the king's absorbing desire to annul his marriage to the now 40-year-old Catherine. Henry's precise motivations and intentions over the coming years are not widely agreed on. Henry himself, at least in the early part of his reign, was devout and well informed Catholic to the extent that his 1521 publication, Stereo Spectrum Sacramentorum Defense of the Seven Sacraments, earned him the title of Fidei Defender of the Faith from Pope Leo the Ninth. The work represented a staunch defence of papal supremacy, a bit one couched in somewhat consonant terms. It's not clear when Henry changed his mind on the issue, as he grew more intent in a second marriage. Clearly, by 1527, he had convinced himself that Catherine had produced no male heir, because their union was blighted in the eyes of God. Indeed, marrying Catherine, his brother's wife, had, he had acted contrary to Lectivus, the Act 28, also 21, and a justification Thomas Cranmer used to declare the marriage null and void. Martin Luther, on the other hand, had initially argued against annulment, stating that Henry VIII could take a second wife in accordance with his teaching that the teaching that the Bible allowed for polygamy but not divorce. Henry now believed that the Pope had lacked the authority to grant a dispensation from his impediment. It was this argument that Henry took to Pope Clement the Seventh in 1527, in the hope of having his marriage to Catherine annulled, foregoing at least one less openly defiant line of attack and going public. All hopes of tempting Catherine to retire to a nunnery, otherwise stay quiet, was lost. Henry sent his secretary William Knight to appeal directly to the Holy See by the way of despectively worded craft papal bull. Knight was unsuccessful. The Pope could not be misled so easily. Other missions concentrated on arranging a celestial court to meet in England with a representative from Clement VII, although Clement agreed to the creation of such a court. He never had any intention of empowering his legate. Lorenzo Campeggio decided in Henry's favour. The bias was perhaps the result of pressure from Emperor Charles V, but it is not clear how far this influenced either Campeggio or the Pope. After less than 2 months of hearing, Clement called the case back to Rome in July 1529, which it was clear that it would never re-emerge. The chance for an annulment lost. Cardinal Wolsey bore the blame. He was charged with pre-manure in October 15 anyway. This is all so that he could get married and try to have wins. He was absolutely lost it. In October 1529, and his fall from grace was sudden and total. Briefly reconciled with Henry and officially pardoned in the first half of 1530, he was charged once more in 1530, and this time for treason, but died while awaiting trial. After a short period in which Henry took government upon his own shoulders, Thomas More took on the role of Lord Chancellor and Chief Minister, intelligent and able but a devout Catholic and opponent of the annulment, but initially cooperated with the King's new policy, denouncing Wolsey in Parliament. A year later, Catherine was banished from court and her rooms were given to Anne Boleyn. Anne was an unusually educated and intellectual woman for her time and was keenly absorbed and engaged with the idea of the Protestant reformers, but the extent to which she herself was a committed Protestant is much debated. When Archbishop of Canterbury William Wardham died, Anne's influence and the need to find a trustworthy supporter of the annulment had Thomas Cranmer appointed to the vacant position. This was approved by the Pope, unaware of the King's nonchalant plans for the church. I mean, it was the way it's an absolute all this for try and get angry. If he wasn't happy, he would just divorce one wife, married another. Um, but also I've went on too long. 'Cause this is 25 minutes of a video, so I'll leave it there and maybe come back and read some more. Right, so say good night and love and light.